Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin, and we are the Dungeon Dudes.
The 2024 Player's Handbook is, as always, packed with spells, taking up like almost a third of the page count in the entire book. And of the hundreds of spells in the rules, a bunch of them have seen tweaks and changes, but some have been really nerfed, and some have been buffed.
So today we're going to take a look at the top 5 nerfs and the top 5 buffs. There's also some cool new spells in here, and a lot of our favorites are back and untouched. But some of the spells that we didn't love in 2014 now might be some of the more useful spells. And some of our favorite spells from 2014 we might not be taking as often. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get rolling.
Kicking things off with the nerfs, and the one that hurts our spirit. It hurts us spiritually. As befits the weapon. Spiritual weapon now has concentration. The famous cleric spell that lets you attack with a floating spectral weapon used to be no concentration, and in 2024, you got to concentrate on it.
Other than that, there's not really any major difference to it. It's still the same spell that you always loved, but the big problem for me, I'm going to sound like a broken record because this is the same thing that I'm telling everybody not to be mad about in other areas of the game, but apparently this is the one sticking point for me, and this isn't enough to make me be like, oh, these rules suck. Like, no, they're great. But Spirit Guardians and Spiritual Weapon, the combo, it was my favorite combo in the game. Being a cleric who was like buffing and healing and protecting and doing all those things. But then when it came time to do damage, I could have Spirit Guardians and Spiritual Weapon.
Yeah. Now
I have to have one or the other.
Unless you are a War Domain Cleric.
Unless you're a War Domain Cleric. So War Domain Cleric is now my favorite cleric because I get to do my favorite thing. But it is funny that like in every other part of the game, when people are like, I can't do this broken combo from 2014. I'm like, yeah, that's probably a good thing. And maybe
I don't think this was a broken combo.
I don't think it was either. And I think that's why it hurts.
Was just good.
It was a good combo.
Yeah.
But it didn't like, it wasn't like clerics were sweeping the battlefield. They were they were holding their own.
Yeah. And I feel like this is a tough thing because it kind of hits hard because like, in the first couple levels as a cleric, it was really nice to put Bless out and then attack with your spiritual weapon.
Yeah.
And then doing the Spirit Guardians, like it felt like a little reward. It was like, hey, cleric, you can have a buff out, but now while you're concentrating on the buff that's supporting the rest of the party, you can actually be contributing a little bit more to the damage with your bonus action. And so losing out on that kind of sucks. On the flip side, the upcasting of Spiritual Weapon is better now.
I was about to say, so finally we get good upcasting. So I guess it makes up for it that you can upcast it to do better?
Yeah. Ironically enough, Mordenkainen's sword had its damage increased, but an upcast Spiritual Weapon is just as good.
Yeah. So you can still upcast Spiritual Weapon instead of... I mean, they're 4 different...
It would have been ironic if they had taken concentration off Mordenkainen's sword, but they didn't.
I will say that, unfortunately, I think in my books, when it comes now between, am I going to cast Spirit Guardians or Spiritual Weapon, it's probably Spirit Guardians. And if it's between Bless and Spiritual Weapon, it's probably Bless, which means Spiritual Weapon went from a must-have now down to I might not even take it.
Now it's are you a War Domain Cleric? Great, it's your thing. And if you're not, I think that you might see some clerics that are like 3rd or 4th level using it. And that's it.
Next up, we come to Forcecage. 2 major changes here. It now consumes the component required for it, and it requires concentration.
So the whole point, Forcecage is like one of my favorite spells in the game. I love the wall spells. I love these kind of battlefield control spells. And the reason why Forcecage was good was because you didn't have to concentrate on it. Otherwise, it actually is the only benefit that it has over Wall of Force is that it's harder to teleport out of. But now...
And it costs you 1,500 gold every time you cast it now.
But now it's a 7th level spell slot, which are at a premium. You have to concentrate on it. And it's just, in most cases, it's like, well, I'm just going to cast Wall of Force. The only kind of interesting thing about this that maybe is compelling for some people is that more classes have access to Forcecage, like warlocks and well, for bards it doesn't matter because bards are going to be able to get Wall of Force anyways because of their 10th level magical secrets thing.
Yeah.
So it is kind of this thing of like I think that most people who are going to be would have cast it are just going to bring Wall of Force.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the most useful household objects is the microwave, and one of our favorite spell combinations was the microwave, which involved Sickening Radiance and Wall of Force.
Yeah.
You trap your creatures in the Sickening Radiance, and you microwave them to death. Same way the gremlin, that one gremlin went. But anyway, it's gone now. We can't microwave. No more.
Not as one character. Two characters working together have to do it.
It's now a 2-person combo, not a 1-person combo. I now need Monty to come over to help me make my burrito. Otherwise, can't do it alone anymore.
I mean, I think that Forcecage, like, here's the thing: is Forcecage still powerful and an encounter-ending spell in some cases? Absolutely. It's just the question of when Forcecage and Wall of Force exist together, and Wall of Force is a 5th level spell that gets you almost everything you want.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, in almost any case, you're better to save the 7th level spell slot and just use the 5th level slot with Wall of Force, unless you know you're going up against a teleporting enemy. And even then, an enemy still has a chance of teleporting out of the Wall of out of the Forcecage because they make a charisma save. So, yeah. Disappointed. Was my favorite spell. I still like Wall of Force, and I'm glad Wall of Force wasn't nerfed.
One that I'm not that upset about the nerf of is Counterspell. I was sad at first, but the more I think about it, I think I'm sad from a player's perspective, but DMs counterspelling players was always kind of like not fun. To just be like, oh, you just wasted one of your precious resources in the midst of an epic combat, and no. Just no. Counterspell now requires a Constitution saving throw in order for it to work. It doesn't just automatically work anymore.
Yeah. Anyone who has played against a blue deck in Magic the Gathering
hate blue deck.
Can tell you how not fun Counterspell is. Counterspell is only fun for the person doing the counterspelling. And those benefiting from the fact that the spell was counterspelled. As a DM, I did find it rather frustrating for boss monsters, in particular boss spellcasters, to be very easily shut down by, especially if you've ever had a player character party where you had more than one character that could cast counterspell, and you had a boss battle against a single spellcasting boss, you could just feel how counterspell just shut that whole thing down.
I will say, though, from the player perspective, there have been times that Sebastian, my sorcerer in our game, has used Counterspell in a moment that felt like I saved the entire party. And those have been like some of the, like having the Counterspell go off and you being like, what level are you casting out at? And that's where the fun guessing game comes in. And I'm like,
totally
7th? And you're like, you shut it down. That's what you needed. And I'm like, oh my God, I just stopped like a huge damaging spell from killing us all.
Well, and no spoilers, but I mean, it's years old now, but like the climax of Critical Role Campaign 1 involves an upcast counterspell. And that type of thing could not happen under the new rules because now legendary monsters just are going to legendary resistance their way through counterspell.
I'm wondering if D&D would benefit from a separate spell list of like spell alternatives for DMs to use instead of players. So a player gets counterspell that just works the way that it used to, but a DM always has to make a Constitution saving throw when they're counterspelling a player's
Well, that's what we've actually been seeing, though, is like we started to see this in the Mordenkainen's foes monsters, where you would get monsters that would have this kind of like counterspell reaction that wasn't actually the counterspell spell, and it would counterspell the spell, but it wouldn't cost the player the spell slot. And that's the other change here is that you don't lose the spell slot when you're counterspelled either,
which is good.
Right?
That's good.
It's a little less punishing in that respect too. So I think, counterspell has always been one of those things of like, is it good for the game? Is it bad for the game? Should it exist? Should it not exist? Because I do think the one thing that we do like the fantasy of is the spell duel.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess the saving throw makes it more of a duel.
yeah, and like I think that the for me the most interesting iteration of Counterspell in third edition to counterspell somebody, you it was much more complex, and so you didn't see people doing it, but like you could you to counter a spell required you casting the spell, the same spell. So to counter fireball, you had to give up your own casting of fireball.
Interesting.
Yeah,
So
and
if you didn't have the spell prepared, you couldn't counter it. But
yes,
if you knew what they were casting, you're like, I know that spell, I can reverse it.
yeah, and you had to ready an action to counterspell somebody
Right.
instead of having the counterspell spell. There was like a feat that let you use a spell of the same school of magic instead of the exact same spell, so you could use any evocation spell to counterspell. But it still really wasn't a thing that you saw people do a lot, aside from like really specific builds.
Yeah.
In general, I like, again, as a player, I love counterspell.
Yeah.
Right. And as a DM, I have mixed feelings about it. And so ultimately it's a nerf.
Yeah.
It is,
No matter what, it's a nerf, but
yeah.
is it an appropriate nerf, or is it, I mean, I guess we'll see how it feels at the table.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is less the most essential pick in the world now, and it's more just like a cool spell that you could have if you want to like disable things.
The con saving throw is what makes it really harsh, because monsters tend to have really good con saves, and players tend to also, spellcasting players tend to invest heavily in their constitution saving throws because of concentration.
And most spellcasting NPCs or monsters have a good constitution as well to like hold the
right
line.
And they can legendary resistance their way through it. So yeah, I don't know if counterspell is definitely not an auto pick anymore. I think it's still a useful spell to have in your arsenal, and I think that actually sorcerers are still going to take it because they have the extra spells known, and sorcerers can actually heighten spell their counterspell to give disadvantage on the saving throw,
which is cool.
Yeah.
Another, I think, appropriate nerf here is Conjure Animals. These conjuring spells have actually gone through a major change. No longer are you summoning a bunch of animals from the monster manual. In this case, you conjure a nature spirit that appears as a large pack of spectral intangible animals in an unoccupied space you can see within range. And yeah, so you can make it like wolves, serpents, birds. You have advantage on strength saving throws while you're within 5 feet of the pack, and when you move on your turn, you can also move the pack up to 30 feet to an unoccupied space you can see. Whenever the pack moves within 10 feet of a creature you can see, and whenever a creature you can see enters a space within 10 feet of the pack or ends its turn there, you can force that creature to make a dexterity saving throw. On a failed save, they take 3d10 slashing damage. The creature makes this save only once per turn.
Yeah, so now Conjure Animals is kind of like a weird flaming sphere / moonbeam / insubstantial battlefield control sort of thing that bites people.
Can I be real with you? This works for me.
Yeah, I think it's fine. You're not jumping into the monster manual anymore.
And you're not summoning like 26 owls. I don't know. Like,
I mean, we ran that game with Chris and Colby where Chris was playing the shepherd druid that summoned like, I think there was the one encounter where he summoned like 30 owls.
Yeah.
And like he had macros to fast roll his way through that, but I do think that players going into the monster manual to grab monsters as a spell, I'm glad to see the end of that.
It was always a little sloppy. It was always a little bit cumbersome. And unless you were Chris making macros, you were bogging down the table. I actually think this works better at the table. It's going to be better for the flow of the game. It's going to be easier for people who do not want to make macros to use. I think that this is a good change.
I agree. Obviously it's strictly speaking, it's a nerf.
Yeah, it is 100%.
Yeah, because not grabbing a bunch of elks, a stampede of elks that put bodies on the board that take hit points, that does less damage than it would have done before. It is a nerf. Make no mistake. But the spell is better designed in this way, even if it's a little bit derivative. And you still have the option of having a summonable stat block in the form of summon beast and summon fey. It's just that this is way more like it's healthier for the game. Yeah.
On the same token, the last spell in the nerfs is Conjure Woodland Beings.
Which, if you remember, this was the spell that allowed you to summon pixies to turn everybody into a bunch of flying T-Rexes. Which
Which it doesn't do that anymore.
No.
And we're fine with that. Again, it's definitely a nerf, but now you are conjuring a nature spirit and it flits around you in a 10-foot emanation for the duration. And whenever the emanation enters the space of a creature you can see, or whenever a creature you can see enters the emanation or ends its turn there, you force the creature to make a wisdom saving throw, and the creature takes 5d8 force damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one. Again, the creature only makes this once per turn. Nature's version of Spirit Guardians.
Yes, it's a slightly smaller range. You actually can also disengage as a bonus action while the spell is active as well. Slightly smaller range, but more damage.
Yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think it's great. Again, you cannot summon pixies to turn you into flying T-Rexes. So by all accounts, this is a nerf. But these two are interesting because they're almost completely new spells. They're not the same thing that they used to be at all. They have the same name. And what I like is they invoke the same flavor. Like I can still role play it at the table of summoning like spectral animals from the nature nether to fight on my behalf. They're just more functional at the table, and I think that's okay.
Yeah. And again, you still have Summon Beast and Summon Fae if you wanted to actually feel like you're grabbing a stat block. In general, I support these changes. I think that the monster manual being a resource for players is always problematic. And in general, the rules should avoid any sort of spell that says you can summon a monster of blanket creature type is
What about polymorph?
Polymorph still exists. At least polymorph is still limited to beasts. And polymorph,
I still like polymorph though.
Yeah.
I still think it's okay as is.
I'm surprised that, like, this is a bit of a sidetrack here, but I'm surprised that polymorph was not changed into here is the polymorph form that you turn into. It is still go to the monster manual and choose a beast.
Yeah.
Which I'm surprised that wasn't nerfed. Yeah. But we're not talking about spells that we thought were nerfed or just altered. Polymorph is one of them, though. Moving along to the ones that were buffed.
Yeah, as we come to the buff spells, I'm excited to talk about these. One that I think everybody's going to be excited for is True Strike. This reads very different now, and everybody's going to want True Strike. Well, a lot of classes are going to want True Strike. So, guided by a flash of magical insight, you make one attack with the weapon used in the spell's casting. So you're making an attack as part of casting the spell. The attack uses your spellcasting ability for the attack and damage rolls instead of using strength or dexterity. If the attack deals damage, it can be radiant damage or the weapon's normal damage type. And as with most cantrips, the damage goes up at certain levels. Goes up to 1d6, 2d6. Finally, at 17th level, you're at 3d6.
So I want to point out something.
Yeah.
So if you are a wizard, you can use this with a melee or ranged weapon. So as a wizard, if you want to pack a light crossbow and shoot that crossbow with True Strike, at level 1, your crossbow True Strike does 1d8 plus 3 damage, whereas like your Ray of Frost or your Firebolt would just be a straight d10 roll. So from a pure damage dealing perspective, True Strike is one of the better, if not, barring Eldritch Blast, it's one of the best damage dealing cantrips now.
We finally have an explanation for how Gandalf defeated the Balrog, because he was using True Strike on his sword.
I mean, that was also like a very powerful magic sword.
I mean, fair. I'm just,
and he's
it's
also
a
like
joke, Monty.
Angel.
No, but the idea is that like a wizard you could be the wizard with a sword now. It's not your primary go-to, but hey, if a goblin runs up to you, you can cast True Strike and slam it with your sword, and there you go.
Yeah. Obviously, we're probably going to see a lot of Gish type builds want to build around this. I think what's interesting about it is that it's still only on the cantrip casting. So if you're playing something like a Valor Bard or an Eldritch Knight or a Blade Singer, I'm talking about one of those classes that has the extra attack feature that lets them sub out extra attack, one of the attacks of extra attack for a cantrip casting. You can do this with True Strike. It's just that it's not applying your spell casting ability to every single attack you're making.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that you might still see Blade Singers and Valor Bards still wanting to have a good dexterity score and primarily attacking with their dexterity and favoring the old blade cantrips. But I think that for characters that only are ever going to make one attack, this is pretty good. Like I could actually see an intelligence-focused not Eldritch Knight, Arcane
Trickster, yeah.
using this. That would be pretty cool, actually. I could see clerics liking this as well. Yeah, or even like a bard that isn't getting the extra attack feature from their subclass would really like this too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of the conjuring spells, we talked about 2 nerfs earlier on conjuring spells, but here's one that might shock and surprise you. Conjure Minor Elementals. Now might be the best spell in the whole game. So concentration, up to 10 minutes. You conjure spirits from the elemental planes that flit around you in a 15-foot emanation for the duration. Until the spell ends, any attack you make deals an extra 2d8 damage when you hit a creature in the emanation. This damage is acid, cold, fire, lightning, your choice when you make the attack. In addition, the ground in the emanation is difficult terrain for enemies, and you can upcast this, and for every level you upcast it by, it gains an additional 2d8 damage.
Okay, so I am nominating this spell for the don't put your hopes and dreams around the build surrounding the spell, because if there's something that's going to get nerfed in an errata, this is it. I think that this is probably one of the ones that somehow either somebody missed the memo to change the 2 back to a 1 in the editing phase, because as written, the 2d8 damage initially and the 2d8 scaling for this with builds that are going to take advantage of making multiple attacks is bonkers.
You can. One of my favorite ideas here. So first of all, druids have lent themselves more to the idea of like picking up a weapon. And so you could be a druid who's attacking with doing, if let's say you upcast it to 9th level, you're doing what, 12d8?
And then so 5th level is 48, 6th level is 68, 7th level is 8d8, 8th level is 10d8. Yeah, 12d8 for a 9th level slot.
Or, because bards have their new magical secrets that let them grab any spell from a few different spell lists, including Druid, which this is on.
And it's on the wizard list.
You can be a Valor Bard who grabs this and casts it as a 9th level spell, adding 12d8 to your multi-attack.
Yes, because you could be a Valor Bard, and you could take 1 level of fighter, so you get the Nick weapon mastery, and you get the 2-weapon fighting style, and then you fighting style feat, and then you grab dual wielder. So now you're a Valor Bard that can make 4 attacks on a turn, and so you can cast the spell to get it rolling, and obviously it's an action to cast, so you will have like a turn of having to set yourself up, but then on the next turn you just annihilate the world. It's unequivocally, it's broken.
I also want to point out the fact that it doesn't specify melee attacks means this works on spell attacks. This works on ranged attacks. Mind you, they do need to be in the emanation.
Yes.
So only within 15 feet. But it just does open it up even more that it works on any attack.
Yeah. So one of the examples that I've seen used for this is a point blank range shotgun blast using Scorching Ray.
Yeah. 3 Scorching Rays all doing...
Yeah. Which is pretty brutal as well. So like, I think we're all of the consensus here that this spell's going to get nerfed. So I'm personally at the point where, like, I feel like anybody, like, I personally feel that this qualifies as, like, this is clearly somebody somebody had to have missed the memo on this spell.
For a game that has done, like, the 2024 rules have done an excellent job in balance.
Yeah.
And this feels like a misstep. I'm excited about it. Like, I love some of the builds we're thinking of, but also when we're thinking of builds that way, that means that we're fighting the broken thing in the game.
Let me put it this way. I feel like even big corporations with massive teams of people get things wrong 1% of the time, right? Like that's just, it doesn't matter how many billions of dollars that you have. Any large corporation with a large group of people working on things is going to miss something in whatever they do. Like, let's face it, video games have bugs. This is the bug. This is a very much missed bug. I hope that we get an errata that nails it down. So I'm hesitant to come out swinging with like, this is the build that you should get excited about, because I'm reasonably confident it's going to be nerfed.
It's too good.
Yeah. I hope it's not nerfed into the ground.
No, like switching it from 2d8 on an upcast to 1d8 might be all it needs.
Or 1d8 for every 2 spell levels. Yeah.
Previously, years ago, we did our top 5 worst spells in the game, and a lot of people were surprised to see Witchbolt on that list, and we explained why we had a lot of gripes with it. But Witchbolt's back, and it's better.
It's now got a range of 60 feet.
That's already right away. Range of 60 feet. You've solved one of my major issues. It's concentration up to a minute. Beam of crackling energy lances towards a creature within range, always has. Create that sustained arc of lightning, which we all love, Emperor Palpatine style. Make a ranged spell attack against the creature. On a hit, the target takes 2d12 lightning damage. On each of your subsequent turns, you can take a bonus action to deal 1d12 lightning damage to the target automatically, even if the first attack missed. The spell ends if the target is ever outside your range, same as before, but the range is now 60 feet. And you can upcast it for an additional 1d12 damage for each level above your normal spell level.
Mind you, that's still only on the initial casting. So what's happened here is the range doubled.
Yeah.
The initial damage doubled.
Yeah.
And now, instead of being forced to spend your action every round to sustain it, it is now a bonus action to sustain.
Which means you can now cast other spells while maintaining your Emperor Palpatine Force Lightning.
And it's not reliant on that initial hitting either.
You create the sustained arc regardless.
Yes. I think this is now a very good low-level spell for dealing with a meaty target.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can just create that tie to them and continually punch away at their damage while doing other things.
Yeah, like just hitting them with cantrips.
Yeah.
Right? Like that was my whole argument before against Witchbolt, was that like it was not as good for a first level slot as just throwing a direct damage dealing spell and then following that up with cantrips. But now it's a great opener to hit someone hard and then hit them with cantrips while doing extra damage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or dropping other big spells that impact the battlefield in meaningful ways. You could you're not going to be concentrating on anything else, but if you have if you're concentrating on the one meaty target, but they have a group of enemies around them, like minions, connecting with them and then dropping a fireball on them the next turn while still picking away at them and killing all the minions. Yeah. You're doing a lot. You're doing a lot now.
Yeah.
So I think that's great.
Yeah, I think it's decent. I don't necessarily think it's a spell that you're going to see a lot at high levels of play, but I think now it is a decent first level damage dealing spell. Another
spell that you may not want to sleep on is going to be the new and improved sleep spell. See what I did there? So sleep has kind of been completely reworked.
Sleep used to you used to have an area of effect where you rolled 5d8, totaled up that as a hit point total, and that many hit points worth of monsters just fell unconscious immediately.
Now it's a 5-foot radius sphere that you center on a point in range, and everybody inside must succeed on a wisdom saving throw or they are incapacitated until the end of their next turn, at which point they must repeat the saving throw, and if they fail the second time, they are unconscious. The spell ends on a target if it takes damage or something within 5 feet of it takes an action to shake it out of the spell's effect. Creatures that don't sleep are immune to this ability, but I think this is so much more fluid. I hated counting the dice, and then one thing that I don't like is always asking the DM what the hit points of the monsters are. I think
Yeah.
that's meta-y, and the spell always felt very like we had to step out of the formalities of role-playing and into a meta headspace to determine how sleep works. Now, I feel like it's just like, yeah, the first round, they're dozing. The second round, they're passed out.
Yeah, and that makes it well, it's on their turn.
Yeah.
Right? So by the time it gets back around to your turn again, they're either out of it or they're passed out. The first thing about this is this, even though it's only a 5-foot radius, this is still AoE incapacitation on a first level spell.
And a 5-foot radius does mean it's like
you could potentially get 4 monsters in it. They have to be right beside each other. But so you could potentially get more than one target. They're incapacitated. So incapacitated is you can't take actions, reactions, or bonus actions. You can't speak. You can't, and it knocks you out of concentration too when you're incapacitated. But the only thing that you can do when you are incapacitated is you can still move. And then when you fail, like the 4th edition version of Sleep worked like this. And I love that version. And I like this version too, because it is potentially an encounter ending spell.
Yeah. And it used to be that like once you got past level 2 or 3 and you were rolling those dice and it's like, oh, this creature has 30 hit points. What could you do? Now you don't need to worry about, oh, I can only make goblins fall asleep. Mm-hmm. It used to be the goblin sleeping spell. Now it just works.
Yeah.
And, you can mix this with like certain things that give the creature disadvantage on their saving throws or all sorts of things like that will just help you put targets to sleep at any level of play. This turned from a useful for like levels 1 to 2 to now being useful for a lot more of the game.
Yes, because putting an
enemy spellcaster at high levels to sleep.
Yeah. Right. And it is a wisdom save. So like the natural progression here is that you start using hypnotic pattern instead. But sleep might be still worth packing for those instances where you only want to use a first level slot and be efficient with your spell slots and you only have 1 or 2 targets to take out. So I quite like this change. I personally think it's a buff. I think that makes the spell more useful as you go to higher levels of play. And I think that if you have ways of debuffing saving throws or applying a penalty to saving throws, it's going to be really, really effective at knocking people out.
This simple buff has given me the inspiration that somebody could play a like hypnotist wizard who packs this and hypnotic pattern and a few more of those like sleep, and they have like the pocket watch or something. Yeah. And like maybe a clockwork soul sorcerer who puts, I don't know. Anyway.
That actually would be cool.
Who has like the pendulum that puts you to sleep. Like there's something there. And it's all because of the buff to the sleep spell. I'm like, there's a theme now that I can bring to life with this. And I love that. Last on the list is a spell that was very much overlooked in 2014, and now you shouldn't overlook, and that is Divine Favor.
It's a paladin spell. It used to be a cleric spell too, but clerics lost it. Divine Favor was very simple, and it is very simple. You cast it as a bonus action, and for the next minute, you do an extra 1d4 radiant damage on your attacks. Except, here's the rub. In 2014, you had to concentrate on it. Now you don't.
Paladins may not be able to smite as easily as they used to, but they can readily add 1d4 to all of their attacks.
Yeah.
Without having to worry about concentrating on a thing. And on top of that, they can be smiting.
Yeah, it makes the dual-wielding paladin look really, really tasty. And I think that there will be people attempting to get Divine Favor without having to be a paladin, because a ranger certainly wish that Hunter's Mark got this treatment, but it didn't. And I think that fighters and rangers and anyone who dual wields would love to just be able to have an extra d4 damage as a bonus action for 1 minute without having to worry about it. So it's a big, like that little d4, it adds up to a lot over a minute.
Yeah. I think that this is now an excellent, like it's a go-to for paladins. I think all paladins should pack it. All paladins should use it. this might be your essential spell for combat now.
Yeah.
That takes us to the end of the top 5 nerfs and the top 5 buffs. I think all in all, I'm pretty excited. There were some nerfs that made me sad, but there are some nerfs that have me go, yeah, that makes sense. And as for the buffs, other than Conjure Minor Elementals, which might need to be dropped down a peg, I think seeing some of these spells that we were always like, never use them, and now they're here and they're better, and I want to use them, that's really exciting to me.
Yeah, there's a lot more spells that what I would consider fall into the category of like tweaks that are mostly like either quality of life changes or like closing loopholes on common exploits. Like simulacrums can't cast simulacrum anymore. And Wish is much more clarified on how it works. So like I like a lot of the clarifications that are in there, but like those clarifications generally fall into the category of like clarifying that this spell is usable the way intended or making sure that the exploits don't work. So I don't really
closing those aren't buffs or deep nerfs. They're fixes.
Yeah.
If you love some of these changes or hate some of these changes, or you have other spells that you've seen in 2024 that you can't wait to use because of the new wording on them, tell us all about it in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider supporting the show by following the links down below.
And if you want to support us by watching us play some D&D, you can check out our actual play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings here on YouTube. You can check out all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we got plenty more coverage of all the changes in the 2024 PHP right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. See you next time
in the dungeon.